back out by Jamey Baker. Yushkevich wheels it back in. Lindros lost. Archibald takes him out of the play. Up with it is Recchi. Walks in front. Shot one, knocked down. Rebound, score! Lindros!
SportsNetwork.com and Wildfire Radio bring you the O&B Puckcast, episode number 49, The Great Flyers Debate. And I'm here with my partner, Chef B. How are you, man?
Very good, very good.
Yeah, we got a full crew tonight. And, of course, from so many outlets, I don't know where to begin. Let me see. We got Brotherly Pod, Brotherly Puck, National Pod, National Puck. Dan the Flyer fan. How are you, man?
Very busy.
Yes, you are. We are going to launch into real fun debate with the help of some questions, a couple of them coming from our listeners. But let's do some intros first. We have some returning guests. First, from PhillySportsNetwork.com, Jamey Baskow.
Hey, how you guys doing? Thanks for having me on again. And, I'm honored to come on for you and your viewership. And I'm glad you guys are a part of Philly Sports Network as well. And, of course, Wildfire. So, on these outlets, I appreciate it. And let's get rocking and rolling. Let's go Flyers, baby. Mic drop.
Yep. Yeah, I was just going to say mic drop. Waiting for that. And, of course, another returning guest from the fourthperiod.com, a frequent contributor, Anthony DiMarco. How are you, man?
Not too bad. How's everyone doing?
Cool. You're up there in Montreal. And there's a lot of buzz these days throughout the whole league, as all of you gentlemen know. Now, what we're going to do tonight, we're going to go through some news and notes about things that are going on with the Flyers around the league. And then we're going to get into a debate, like I mentioned, and we're real excited about that. Let's start with the Stanley Cup playoffs. Dan, the Boston Bruins are just waiting, as a Stanley Cup finalist, waiting for the winner of San Jose and St. Louis. And I'm going to hand pass this one over to you about your thoughts about that series.
Yeah, I was expecting a little more fight out of the Carolina Hurricanes than what we got. But, with Tuukka Rask playing as good as he's been, that was, I think the writing was on the wall in that series from the beginning. And over in the West, as long as the refs keeps helping out the Sharks, they have a good chance to have a San Jose-Boston Cup final this year.
Yeah. Chef, the only thing is, though, I think San Jose looks like an older team with a lot of injuries. It's been beaten down over the course of some series. I really thought they were done after Las Vegas. I thought Vegas was a better team. And, right now as it stands, St. Louis has all the momentum after that shocking victory in San Jose yesterday afternoon.
You know what? I missed the game yesterday, but I've seen almost every San Jose game since in the postseason here. And I have to laugh because every time I thought, they're done. When was the last time we saw a team get to the Cup in all 7 games? I can't remember it. If they all went to Game 7s, they got there. I don't know who it was, but I'm not counting them out yet because it looked like they were down against Vegas, and it looked like they were down last round too. So I'm gonna hope that they get it. I want Jumbotron to get a cup.
Yeah. Well, the way I look at it is, Anthony, I think Joe Thornton had his chance at a cup versus the Penguins. And we have guys at St. Louis like Steen and some of the leftover crew from the Bacchus days. And the names aren't coming to mind, but I guess Pietrangelo and some other guys going back maybe a decade that have been waiting for this opportunity. And with the Flyers on that team, I'm kind of rooting for the Blues at this point.
Yeah, well, I remember back in 2014 when they acquired Steve Ott and Ryan Miller. I really thought that that was going to be the Blues' year. They've always struggled between the pipes, and then they got Miller. But it seems like, as you mentioned, it's been like a really long time coming, and it's kind of like a team that you're rooting for, even as upstairs as the GM goes. Armstrong made a lot of good moves this offseason to go get Ryan O'Reilly, Tyler Bozak, Patrick Maroon. And for a fan base that has never won, and for a core group of players and management group that has been trying so hard for as many years, it's a pretty feel-good story, and I would be totally okay with seeing them go to the Cup final against Boston.
Yeah, yeah. And Jamey, why don't we wrap this up? When you think about it, Boston-St. Louis series would probably be a physical series, which goes against the grain of what we keep seeing with a lot of analysts that say that the game is going toward more a speed game. And then you look last year, Washington, the Capitals win, very physical team. Both St. Louis and Boston are very physical teams, and San Jose, for that matter, certainly with a lot of speed. But, the physical, heavy game is not quite dead yet.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why St. Louis is doing this. The longer a series goes, I think personally it benefits St. Louis. They could bore battle with the best of them. They just overtook the Flyers, this past year, in both games and whatnot. I think one of the scores was 7-3, and that's because they were much stronger. They were faster. They were a more skilled team. I'm not shocked by any means that St. Louis is still standing. They're getting fantastic goaltending from Jordan Binnington. And, like Anthony mentioned, those core players, at the additions of Ryan O'Reilly, Tyler Bozak, and Patrick Maroon, you filter that in with, Tarasenko. That team is loaded to the gills. And, of course, you can't forget about Braden Shen, too, potting a goal here and there. He hasn't had the best playoff series, to date, but, they're just getting really, really good goaltending as well. Yeah. And, Craig Berube's pushing all the right buttons. We got to give Craig Berube props here. I mean, he endured the same team with the Philadelphia Flyers, when his first season. I mean, he came in December and he took the Flyers to, the playoffs. The Flyers were out of it at that time too. So Craig Berube's been in this position before. I just think he's a much better coach now than he was with the Philadelphia Flyers.
Well, it certainly seems that way right now. Just my comment on here about the Blues. Before Berube took over, they looked like a team that was skating in mud. And they play a lot faster. And there's not like a lot of swift skaters on that team. But I think he has those guys in good condition. They're moving the puck better, out of the zone faster. And when you do that, you're going to look like a faster team than maybe you are. But, gents, let's move on to the International Ice Hockey Federation World Championships being held in Slovakia. And, Dan, the way I look at these tournaments after the season, it's guys given kind of like three-quarters effort. And the most intriguing thing, as we look at the rundown of Flyers that are at this tournament, we have Couturier, Carter Hart, and Phil Myers playing for Alain Vigneault in Canada. We'll get back to that in a minute, because to me that's the most intriguing part. You have JVR playing for USA, Lindblom and Haig for Sweden, Jake Voracek and Gudis for Czech Republic, and Michael Raffel for Austria. Any thoughts about either the tournament itself or the intrigue of Alain Vigneault coaching three guys that he likely will be head coach of next year for the Flyers?
Yeah, I haven't paid super close attention to the tournament, but, it is a good thing that AV is getting a look at these guys, especially three, big pieces for the Flyers moving forward, in Couturier, Hart, and Myers. So it's a good thing that Myers, was put in the last minute after Brandon Montour went down, and Hart, even though he's only seen, 2-3 games against relatively easy competition, he has looked good, including a shutout against Great Britain. So overall, it looks good, and I'm glad that he's getting the opportunity to look at those guys. I've seen a couple highlights from Van Riemsdyk that have looked very solid. Haven't heard much about anybody else, but, overall, I'm glad that AV is getting a look at, three of those key pieces for the Flyers.
Yeah, and Chef, the thing that I think about today, I think that Canada was up 5-0 with 9 minutes left, and Carter Hart got pulled out. They put Mackenzie Blackwood in there it's a tournament, so they're going to do things a little bit different just to get him a little bit of work, because I think he was a late addition. So it's interesting, that dynamic that Dan was talking about.
Yeah, I mean, he's been in 3 games, Hart. He's only given up 2 goals, so you got to, whether or not, there are, as Dan said, teams of a lower caliber, I don't mind so much. To me, it's more experience, and it's at a different level, kind of, not similar to playoffs, but kind of similar to playoffs. But the most shocking thing to me was, not the fact that he had 2 shutouts in international. The fact that Great Britain has a team. I mean, it's not one of those countries you expect a whole bunch of hockey players to come out of. I expect them to compete very heavily in cricket, but not so much in ice hockey. But speaking about Raffle, he kind of went down like Theon Greyjoy, didn't he? He kind of went down a hero's death. He tried all he could for Austria, but at the end he died a hero. So good.
Yeah, I read something online about what Raffle did. Maybe tell me a little bit more about that, Chef, just before we move on.
Which one? It seemed like he pushed the game. I've only seen what I've read, but it seemed like he pushed the game. He got 2 goals. He kind of pushed it to I think it was a shootout today, and I think they got eliminated by Italy. So, but I mean. He's single-handedly involved in half the goals, I think, for the team. So for Austria, so that I'm glad he's doing well, but they came up a little short. So
yeah. Well, I dare say that Britain is very proud of their hockey team. But Anthony, that just shows you if Michael Raffle was having dominating moments during the tournament, the quality of the competition. Did you happen to see the Vigneault interview with Darren Dreger by any chance?
I actually did not catch the interview, but I heard it was pretty revealing. But I think that the competition level it's in the pudding. Just if you look at Team Canada's roster, there's not a lot of heavy hitters there, and the only one that really was there was John Tavares. And he pulled out before the tournament even started. So you look at some of these teams like France, Italy, Great Britain, and it's not very shocking to see that Michael Raffle was dominating, because it's not. It hasn't been the best competition, as you mentioned.
Jamey, one thing I picked up when I saw that interview with AV, you can see his intensity. He's going to push the Flyers probably more than any coach since Laviolette, because you just see he has this quiet intensity, and then you think about having Michel Therrien, and Mike Yeo, in addition, both with kind of taskmaster reputations. It's going to be a very interesting season on the Flyers bench.
Oh yeah, absolutely. He's a good communicator, and that's where he gets the most from his players. He demands. He's going to demand a lot, and a big word to use this year is accountability. There's going to be tons of accountability in that locker room. Finally, I mean, you make a mistake, you're going to be held accountable for it through AV, and I think that's what the Flyers need. Some type of accountability. I mean, because we were a little loosey-goosey this past year, and I especially during my times in the locker room as Chef, you know what I'm talking about because you were in the locker room as well. It was very loosey-goosey. After a loss, it was very quiet. And I understand losing is not easy, but how many times was it quiet? You could hear a pin drop in there, yeah? I mean, there was not much accountability from these players. They said the right things to the media, oh, we need to get better. We need to start gelling as a team. We need to do this, but they never put it to they never went. It was very rare that they went forth with it. Now AV's here. He's going to demand that. He's going to demand the accountability. He's going to demand strength and conditioning. But from all the players I talked to, including Daniel Carcillo, because I talked to him a little bit on Twitter as well, Daniel Carcillo, he's a very good communicator. That one thing that I've heard from AV is that he demands the most out of his players, but he gets tons of respect from the players. He turns into a players coach because of his communication. And that it was something that was missing with Hackstall. Hackstall wasn't the best with communication, and I think that's where he lost some of his players. And it was just tough to play for him because they didn't know where they stood. Like the incidences with Travis Konechny. Yeah, it's okay to bench him, or late in the game or something, but explain to him why he's being benched. And you saw that with Scott Gordon on the bench. He was talking to the players, and that's why the players love Scott Gordon. You could just feel it was a different vibe in that locker room after Scott Gordon took over, and being at practices, like it was a feel-good locker room. Nolan Patrick was playing all night long. That was his jam. Him and Travis Konechny, they became best friends. And, it was just a different locker room. And that's what I think is going to be the difference with AV. And you're right about that interview. It was very intense, and he's going to be intense on the ice, too. And let's be honest, that's what the Flyers need. They need a kick in the butt right now. How many years, is it we're going to make the playoffs, miss, make the playoffs, miss, make the playoffs? We've been doing it since, 2011, 12?
Yeah. Yeah, they're stuck. One of the things when Hextall let go of Berube is he felt like the talent he had, that Berube could have got more out of it. It looks like that the Flyers are reaching for that right now, but I think they've made a better choice than Dave Hextall, which is not hard to do. Dan, let's go through a little bit of league news here. Ken Holland's official, running the show in Edmonton, as I think he's the president of hockey operations out there, as well as GM title. Ralph Kruger was hired by the Sabres to coach them. Very interesting hire. Really intrigued a lot of people with his time in Edmonton at a World Championship tournament. Did a good job. I think was that with the Swiss team, I believe. And also, Ryan Kessler gets hip surgery and may be eyeing retirement. And it's interesting. I want to tie in with you, Dan, because you did an article at Brotherly Puck about offer sheet history. And one of the early offer sheets out there was Ryan Kessler by Bob Clark. What was that, 2003 or 2004?
Something like that, yeah.
2005, maybe.
Pull it up. Ryan Kessler was the first one after 2005, so there you go.
Yeah.
Was the first post-salary cap one. Yeah, Ken Holland has his work cut out for him in Edmonton. I don't know why anybody would voluntarily go up there these days, but he did. I have no idea who Ralph Kruger is, but, when the Flyers hired pretty much every available head coach out there for themselves, you have to get a little creative. And, yeah, Ryan Kessler is done. He's going to miss, I believe, at least all of this season. Whether he retires or not, who knows. But, he's had, he's 36, 37 now. So been around for a long time and, one less annoying player in the league, I guess.
Yeah. He was a hell of a player. That was a good get by Clark. He should have bid higher, though, because Vancouver was obviously going to match that. And, Anthony, as we look forward, I'm just curious what your fourth period sources say about how Ryan Kessler's contract is going to be handled. Is he going to be one of those contracts that gets traded? And then I want to ask you about a recommendation by Scott Burnside in The Athletic for the Flyers. But first, Ryan Kessler.
Well, that's a big ticket contract for any team to swallow, and I think it's going to be really hard for the Ducks to move it. And in doing so, in a contract that would typically have to be moved like that and a cap dump, you would have to usually part with a high-level prospect. I don't know if Anaheim has anything beyond that, maybe Sam Steele, that they would have to give up. I think that in the end, Anaheim's just going to have to eat that contract and just put him on LTIR as soon as possible. And, I think it's going to be really, really tough. And as for Burnside, were you referencing the Tyler Myers proposition?
Yeah, he looks at all the choices for the Flyers, and he comes out with a player that, has a great profile, a lot like Sam Morin. I think he'll be better than, sorry, Dan, he'll be better than Sam Morin ever is, probably.
Not possible.
But Tyler Myers is a third-pairing defenseman. They have way too much in the way of assets and cap space, Anthony. I don't see the Flyers settling on that player.
Well, it's like you mentioned, he's very insulated in Winnipeg behind Dustin Byfuglien and Jacob Trouba. And it just kind of it smells as if it's one of those situations where he's going to hit free agency. He's the big named defenseman on the market after Erik Karlsson. And you just think he's going to get a contract in the neighborhood of 6-7 years at $7 million. I haven't seen enough of Tyler Myers in a top four role to be convinced that he could do that. And to be honest, it just seems like he would come here and after a year or two, he would just become the new scapegoat on defense because of the contract that he's going to warrant. People are going to expect the moon. And as you mentioned, a third pairing guy insulated very, very well in Winnipeg. It's something that I would stay away from. I think the Flyers need a defenseman to come in here with pedigree who has displayed a bona fide ability to play in the top four and more so the top pairing. So, yeah, I agree. I would not go after Tyler Myers. One, because I don't think he has the skill set or the pedigree to help this team in the way it needs. And two, just because I think the contract would be too rich.
Yeah. Chef, do you want to weigh in and agree or disagree about that?
No, I agree with that. He just was somebody that's just too the risk reward there is not even close to warranting signing that. In my opinion. I mean, if you're gonna go out and sign somebody and get somebody, make an impact. Don't make a trivial thing because you're gonna get eaten up by all the fan base and us in particular now because you're even more critical right now. This is the time you signed three head coaches for Christ's sake, and you have the ability now to actually make a difference. This is we've talked about probably the most important offseason in the last 10 years, and you're going to throw Myers at me? No.
Yeah, no, exactly, and I think a good way to describe how that would go over right now. If you collectively could come up with one word to describe the news that Tyler Myers is the big ad on the Flyers defense, it would be something like this. Yeah. We are ready for what we're calling the Great Flyers Debate. And here, for the people listening, this is how it's going to work. Our panelists are going to be Dan, Anthony, and Jamey. Because that's why they really came here tonight. They couldn't wait to participate in the debate. I could tell by their feedback when I proposed this. And, Chef, you're going to make comments along the way. You're going to decide and keep tally, if you will. Get the pen out there next to the water. And, yeah, you got it. And then we're going to decide who comes up with the winner. And we'll get the booby prize. Welcome to the Great Flyers Debate. Excellent. Yeah, we have a crowd we just brought in for the debate. We're going to start things off with Jamey. Jamey, the hyperkinetic one. Thanks to Skype, I now realize this. And the idea for this debate kind of grew from a very gentlemanly discussion between Anthony and Jamey about what might have been with the Flyers. So, Jamey, we are going to open up with you, and we're going to ask you if the Flyers had kept Sergei Bobrovsky and presumably not signed Brizgalov, would they have been a cup contender? Jamey, the floor is yours.
I believe if they would have kept Sergei Bobrovsky, that the Flyers would definitely have been contenders for 2 out of 4 years under Dave Haxtell, and virtually contenders. Let me see, the 2012-13 season, the 2011-12 season where Brizgalov was the last, playoff. He won the last playoff series. Absolutely, Bob is a really good netminder, and one reason the Blue Jackets made it to the second round of the playoffs this year. Of course, he's a multiple Vezina winner. Look at the Flyers this past season. What's one thing that was in dire straits? Inconsistent goaltending. You look at it. What caused the downfall for the Philadelphia Flyers this season was the inconsistent goaltending and Ron Hextall not going out and solidifying the goaltending position. If he would have done such, the Flyers would have been considered contenders this year. And unfortunately, we know how that went down. And of course, they did not. After having a decent year last year and making the playoffs after rallying in the second half of the season again, This was different, except for the Flyers were supposed to take the next step. We were supposed to become contenders this year, and we didn't. Why? Because we didn't have a goaltender. Ron Hextall relied on an unhealthy Brian Elliott coming in and an unhealthy, Michael Norworth coming in. So what happens? Inconsistent goaltending leads to what? Unhealthy goaltenders leads to what? Influx with the team. How many times did Steve Mason give up soft goal after soft goal? Let's think back. The 2015-16 playoff series was one of the worst goals in playoff history scored against the Philadelphia Flyers. Remember the goal from center ice where he was flopping with his pads? Mason was a good goaltender, for the Philadelphia Flyers for the amount of years that he put in. But he was also a demon for Mr. Softy. Let's go to the ice cream truck and get a soft ice cream.
Okay, Jamey. Let me. Okay, we're gonna just. For a good job, but of course we have time limits here. It's not any disrespect. But it is a debate. Anthony, I want you to chime in on some of the things that Jamey had to say, and whether you agree or disagree. And the floor is yours.
Well, I agree in the sense that they would have been helped incredibly by Bobrovsky this year. But I mean, I also think a tablecloth with a helmet could have been better than the Flyers goaltenders this year. But in saying that, I think it takes a lot more than one more piece. The Flyers were not even a playoff team this year. If they would have, let's say, made the playoffs and put up a fight in the first round, then Jamey's notion of saying, yeah, you put Bob in the net, then they're contenders. But you can't be from a lower of the seed team, like a bottom barrel team, plop in a goaltender who hasn't had a good playoff career as is, and say, okay, well, now they go from a lower barrel team to a contender. I would say, yeah, the Flyers would have been a bona fide playoff team with Bobrovsky in the net. But I don't think you just plop in Sergei Bobrovsky and say, okay, well, now they're contender. Because at the end of the day, look at their defense. Provorov, after him, not a top pairing guy. Down the middle, they weren't a playoff team in terms of center ice. Sometimes goaltenders in the NHL this year, but the collective unit up front has brought them to within 2 games of the Cup final. As far as Steve Mason goes, in 2 of the first 4 years where Jamey said that the Flyers would have been Cup contenders with Bobrovsky, Mason actually had a better save percentage than Bobrovsky. Mason propelled the Flyers into the playoffs in 2016 with that incredible run in March. And against the Washington Capitals, sure, he gave up that horrendous goal, but the Flyers could barely muster up 20 shots a game on Washington. That was men against boys. That's completely it's just malpractice to compare that series. That team shouldn't have been there, but got into brilliance because of Mason down the stretch. Not to mention, one of the games they won solely because Michael Neuwirth made over 50 saves in that playoff series. Go back to the playoff round before that in 2014 against the New York Rangers, where the Flyers literally got to Game 7 because of brilliance by Ray Emery and by Steve Mason. I just don't think the Flyers' goaltending has been the number one reason for their demise since the 2013 lockout.
Okay. Yeah, good points there. Dan, it looks like we have opposing viewpoints here. Where do you sit in this debate on question 1?
Maybe because I was a bigger Bobrovsky fan than most people were. I don't think he was going to make it. I think Brizgalov was there. I don't really mind that Bob left. Nothing guarantees anything with Philadelphia, especially goaltending. I love Steve Mason. He's probably one of my favorite Flyers in recent memory. Brizgalov was fine as well. I think that the team around them was awful at the time. It's hard to say. I see a lot of people, but they kept Bobs. He would have 2 Vezina trophies and this and that here, but that's not a guarantee. He was a younger guy with potential here, but he never really looked like a superstar. So the fact that they traded him is fine. It is what it is. They needed to get rid of him. They dug themselves with Brizgalov, and they needed help. Mason was great. Mason never got the credit that he truly deserved as a goaltender here. I don't know. I don't know if they'd be contenders with Bobrovsky or not. Who knows? Maybe, but I think that had they just had a better team in front of them, was the bigger issue throughout this time. Obviously, guys like Neuwirth, who haven't been able to stay healthy for the last 3-4 years, have been disasters, but guys like Mason really held it down. Elliott has been solid when necessary. So I'm going to go with Anthony that the goaltending certainly has not been the biggest issue for the Flyers over the last 5 years.
Yeah, I look at the defensemen, but Chef, you are the judge here, and we're just going to get your comments on these three opinions.
Oh, great. That way everybody will hate me no matter what I say.
Well, that's why I set it up that way.
Our judges.
I'm still room by the way.
Jesus. So I'm going to say this. I saw some points with Jamey. I saw some points with Anthony. I saw some points with Dan. But I will concede this. Goaltending was not the ultimate problem. I don't think it would have. Having Bob, I don't think would have solved the problem of the product, especially on defense, that was lacking in that 5-6 year time frame. So I'm gonna rule. It was with I guess Dan and Anthony that it wasn't the goalies. It was more the defense and the players around them.
Okay. So we have a verdict there on question number one. Dan, we're gonna go right back to you. We're gonna kind of crisscross this whole thing here. If the Flyers had kept Craig Berube as their coach, would they be better off than having gone through the Hack era?
Jeez, when I first read this question when it was prompted to me, I don't really know. I don't think Berube is the best coach, but during his time here, he did not have a good roster. Whereas now in St. Louis, he's got a pretty great roster. Dave Haxtell was a god awful coach, and we don't really know what Berube is because the different calibers of teams he's been in. So I don't know if an extra 4 or 5 years of Berube would have been better than Dave Haxtell. I think Ron Hextall's negligence overall with the team would have hurt no matter who they had here. So it's hard to say on that one.
Okay, Anthony, let's get you to weigh in on that, keeping Berube and not hiring Haxtell at all.
I'm kind of with Dan here. I don't think it would have made all that much of a difference. Berube's final year here in 14-15, I think that was one of the worst Flyers rosters we have seen since the 06-07 season. When they brought in Michael Del Zotto and Luke Shen and Grossman and McDonald and that whole decor. He was kind of pretty much set up for failure. But to that same point, I don't know if Berube would have done anything more than Haxtell would have done. As Dan mentioned, Haxtell certainly was far from the best. But I don't know if Berube is truly this great coach or if St. Louis just really, really did not click with Mike Yeo. So, yeah, I'm just going to say it wouldn't have made that much of a difference.
Okay. Yeah, and with that, Jamey, let me get your opinion on that question about keeping Berube and skipping the Hack era altogether.
No, absolutely not. I think Dave Haxtell would have been better. I wouldn't necessarily say better. I think you would have gotten the same coaching out of Craig Berube. I mean, the St. Louis Blues are far more talented than the Philadelphia Flyers. Let's be honest here. I mean, they have a really hot goaltender right now in Jordan Binnington, but the St. Louis Blues are loaded up and down. I mean, with talent throughout their roster. That, to me, I'd have to say I don't know. I agree. I don't know if it's Craig Berube's coaching or just because the St. Louis Blues are that talented and they were underperforming under Mike Yeo. I agree with that as well. I just don't. The Flyers have always made that pressure decision, and that's what scares me about this offseason. And that would have been a pressure decision. Let's keep people could say that firing Craig Berube after 14-15, that it was a pressured decision. The Flyers are used to pressured decisions, and I think the firing of Peter Laviolette. I mean, that was a pressured decision. Being that they lost their first 3 games and then they fired him, and I don't think that this would have been any different under Craig Berube than under Dave Haxtell than Craig Berube.
Okay. And that is that particular round. Chef, let's go to you. I think we had a lot of similar answers there. I don't know if we can actually pick out a winner.
I give credit to all of them because they kind of all of them hit the nail on the head in the same same thing. It would not made a difference. I'm not saying I'm 100% right, but I'm saying this, that I agree with all three of them.
Great. Okay, so we're going to call that one a draw as we move on to the next question. And again, we're going to hit the Wayback Machine in a sense with this next one. As we go to question 3, and we think about that critical moment in time, the Flyers had a gap in their schedule where Dave Haxtell is retained even as Ron Hextall is fired. And you look back, and if Scott Gordon was really ever going to have a chance, and while I think we're all pretty much in agreement that we're better off with Alain Vigneault, it's still disappointing that this collection of talent couldn't make the playoffs. Anthony, let me start with you. If Dave Haxtell was removed at the same time as Ron Hextall, and Scott Gordon was brought in, he had time to install his systems, which he couldn't do for about 6 weeks. Would that have made a difference and helped the Flyers get into the playoffs, in your opinion?
Well, let me ask right before I answer, does that include Carter Hart coming in at the same time? Because Gordon and Carter Hart came in at the same time.
No, it would have been, they would have had to come to that. They were forced into that by injury, so I can't say that. I'm really kind of thinking about the systems installation. The PK was horrendous, and that was a real big, real big sore spot for them, and he did change that kind of right away.
I think that they would have put up a better fight, because I think by the middle of March, after that back-to-back, where that Friday night game in Toronto, if I remember, that's when it kind of it all died in the cradle. So I think that with more time, they would have put up a better fight down the stretch. They wouldn't have quit those last 3-4 weeks. But at the end of the day, I just know those extra weeks of not having Carter Hart in the net, who made a big, big difference and covered up a lot of holes. I don't think it would have gotten them into the playoffs. I just think it would have made them more fun to watch in those weeks. And I think they would have missed the playoffs, but more towards the end of the season, they wouldn't have been dead in the water by March. But ultimately, I still don't think they would have made the playoffs.
Okay, Dan, your turn.
That's an interesting one. Gordon, systematically, he didn't change a whole lot. Obviously the penalty kill got better under him, but, not a whole lot else changed. The only thing he did different from Dave Haxtell was play a lot of the younger guys, the Lindbloms and the Konechnys and the Myers and, the Harts. But if we're just, if Dave Haxtell got fired in October and they replaced him with Gordon, I don't know if they would have made the playoffs. I think they still played some wishy-washy hockey down the line there. And I think that would have continued. I don't think there's enough of a difference of a coaching style from Gordon than there is Dave Haxtell. So I don't think so.
Okay. Jamey, your turn to weigh in.
Heck no. Absolutely not. Scott Gordon could have started the season out with the Flyers. They wouldn't have made the playoffs. The goaltending was too inconsistent. They didn't even know who was playing goal, on a certain night. I mean, it was a breath. It was a breath of fresh air when Carter Hart came in. Carter Hart came in. Who the netminder was each day. Scott Gordon would tell you. And then he went down with an injury. Elliott performed very well. When he came back from his injury, but unfortunately, you didn't know what goaltender was playing because everybody was hurt. I mean, they were about to pick Shep up from the locker room and ask him if he could come to practice the next day to fill in. How many times, during practices did the Flyers have to loan, grab a goaltender, from the street to play the net on the opposite side because they didn't even have enough netminders. You're not going to make the playoffs by playing eight different goaltenders. It's just not going to happen. Not in this league. There's a big boy league, and the Flyers just got overtaken, decimated by goaltending injuries. To me, that was one of Hextall's downfalls, is that he didn't shore up that position by, grabbing a Robin Leonard, or, he had Leonard for 1 year, $1 million. That's what he went to the Islanders for, if I'm not mistaken. 1 year, $1 million, wasn't? But, of course, you didn't know what Robin Leonard was going to give you. You didn't know that he was going to do this with the New York Islanders, so they would have been taken. But he would have been far off, better than Michael Norworth. He was a walking maintenance day as soon as he entered training camp. The goaltending they knew. The thing that gets me about this season is that they knew about Brian Elliott. They knew how unhealthy he was coming into that season, and yet they did nothing. They rolled the dice with him by saying, okay, he could get 100% by training camp, and he never did. And to me, that was the downfall of this Flyers team this year. They were just too inconsistent because they don't know who's playing net. That was part of it. But there's other stuff that go in, not being deep down the middle and, the defense being young and whatnot. But
right.
They didn't have that Keenan back there on the back end. But, I think the Flyers are in a better place now. And looking forward, let's not look back. Let's look forward.
Okay, we're going to do that with our next question.
This Flyers team's going to be fun here next year.
Okay. I'm going to cut you off there because, Chef is just waiting to give a judgment. I don't think he's a boss as it is. He's the chef. He has to make hiring decisions. And, Chef, why don't you weigh in? Again, a lot of similar responses.
Yeah, I think we all agreed that they would not have made the playoffs either way. What would have happened? So I gave a point to everybody in that round as well. I mean, Jamey made some awesome points about the goaltending. Yeah, whether he was 100% or not, even at the start of the season, I don't think it would have made a difference. I don't think any coach you put in there would have made a difference. So I give everybody a point that round.
Yeah, you're probably right. Let's give a Chef an applause for that fine commentary there. Okay, so we're going to head into the next round here. Okay, now we are going to look forward, like Jamey said. And Dan, we're going to start with you. Does the recent Asa Lindell contract of 6 years at $5.8 million AAV set the market for Provorov? If not, where do you think that goes?
I would assume it does. I believe that was actually Anthony that mentioned it on Twitter that they are in a tax-free state, so the number's going to be a little different. But I think that's a good bar. I would be very comfortable with Provorov at 6 years at $5.8 million. I think that's more or less what he's going to get. Depending on what they feel like locking him in for long term, maybe more. Maybe 6.5. But yeah, that would be the bar for Provorov in my opinion.
Okay, Anthony, let's get your words on this.
Well, if they were able to get him for that contract, I think it would be an absolute steal. But at the end of the day, I think Fletcher will use it, but the Provorov camp will be looking more towards the Aaron Ekblad because Esa Lindell is the third guy on that depth chart when you look at it in a long-term perspective behind Heiskanen and John Klingberg. Or even Provorov, despite Sanheim having a really great breakout latter half of the season, he's far and away the number one and has been for the better part of 3 seasons. So I think it's going to be north of $7 million, and it's going to be around the Aaron Ekblad AAV of 7.5. So while that may be a good starting point and talking point, I think it's kind of comparing apples to oranges just based on what each of the defenders mean to their respective clubs.
Yeah, and you think about it, Jamey, Esa Lindell gets just about 20 minutes a night, and I believe Provorov is closer to 25. So why don't you weigh in and as we look at 5.8 AAV for Esa Lindell's contract versus Provorov?
I don't mind the AAV. I think the AAV for Provorov is going to be anywhere from 6 to 7 million. But I think it's the term that's holding this up. So I had a credible source tell me that he was supposed to re-sign with the Flyers before the World began, and I personally believe that of course Fletcher is looking more towards a 6-year deal, whereas the Provorov camp is probably looking more towards a bridge deal, like a 3 or 4 year deal. So it's hard to say if this Esa Lindell set the market. I think it set the market AAV wise. He's going to get at least 5.8, which I think we all knew. But term-wise, I think that's the hold-up right now. So with that, I know for a fact that Chuck Fletcher had multiple conversations with Ivan Provorov's, agent before the season, ended. So I do know that for a fact. So I just believe that it's more or less the term that's holding up this contract. So I would go with a no. Esa Lindell did not set the market, in my opinion.
Okay. Chef, really 3 really good answers there. So you're going to have to. It's tough being a judge, isn't it?
Yeah, 3 completely different answers too. So I'm going to say I'm going to go with Jamey on this one, only because I really think that in everybody's mind, we pretty much knew what he's worth. Well, I guess I can side with Anthony too. I mean, what he's worth to this team, and Anthony did say that. So, but I'm leaning more towards Jamey because I just think that he knows what it's gonna. He's got a little bit of source in there. So I'm gonna lean towards Jamey that way.
Okay. So mark that down as we move on to the next question. And if we're getting kind of like a chainsaw kind of sound, it's just like a cell phone thing. There's nothing wrong with your receiver. This is not the outer limit. So let's move on to the next question. And okay, that's an old show. I hope you enjoyed that reference. If you're over, I don't know, 50, like me.
Hey, I'm 51.
There you go. Okay, we're going to start with Anthony on this one. Does John Davidson going to the Rangers? He's the president now, essentially replacing Glenn Sather. Does that alter the landscape for Artemi Panarin services? As you know, many people were saying, hey, package deal, Bob and Breadman to Florida, and some of that's been kind of falling apart. So, Anthony, why don't you weigh in on that?
Well, I think John Davidson brings a lot more credibility to the Rangers. Even not like they needed that, but they are. But I think it may alter it a bit, to be honest. He obviously is familiar with John Davidson, and it's always kind of been said that it's going to come down to the Rangers or the Panthers as far as Panarin goes, maybe the Blackhawks as well. So I think it may play a bit of a factor in there. I think it's not just a one-horse race now with the Panthers. I think Davidson going there, I think, could maybe sway Panarin a bit.
Yeah. Dan, why don't you weigh in on that one?
Quite frankly, I don't know a lot about John Davidson, but if he's coming from Columbus, I wonder if that gives the Rangers a better chance or a worse chance to sign him. Maybe Panarin doesn't want to be around the guy. Maybe he does. Maybe there's an added draw. Who knows? So, without knowing much about the guy, I really can't give too much of an opinion on this one.
No, that's fair enough. I mean, why speculate when the knowledge is out there? And we're going to finish up this particular one with you, Jamey, based on your sourcing about JD going to the Rangers and its effect on the acquisition of Artemi Panarin.
Actually, I don't have any sources with this one, but all I know is what you guys know. I know it's a 2-horse race between the Rangers and the Florida Panthers. And like Anthony said, it comes down to who Panarin views the most important. Does he view Coach Q as more important as John Davidson? Does he view John Davidson more important than Coach Q? This is a tough one. It's a 50-50 in my book.
Okay, Chef, that's a tough one to judge, but I think we have an answer that I think stood out among the 3. I'll leave that up to you.
I'm going with Dan.
Okay. Okay. You're going with Dan. Okay.
Yep.
I don't necessarily agree with that. But no, you're the judge, and I'm the jerk that's in the peanut gallery. So let's go to the next question. Okay. So we're going to start with Jamey. Okay, this is a good one. Okay. People have been waiting this. And this is kind of, I reworked the question coming from one of our listeners, Flyers Eric. I kind of rephrased it to include some other players. Which second-line center should the Flyers pursue this year? Kadri or Ryan Nugent-Hopkins via trade? Or Kevin Hayes or Matt Duchene via unrestricted free agency? Jamey, the floor is yours.
Matt Duchene. Absolutely, without a deal. I think he'd move the needle He is a playoff clutch performer, much like a Danny Briere. I think Matt Duchene is the missing piece. The question is, do the Flyers want to pay him? And he's going to command term. So you're looking anywhere from a 6 or 7 year deal, maybe even upwards of an 8 year deal for anywhere from $9 to $10 million per. So if you're factoring in, cap, Matt Duchene is not your guy. Obviously, my guys would be it would be a Nathan Kadri, but I think the Flyers going to have a tough time getting Kadri. There's going to be multiple bidders for him, and the Leafs are against the cap here, so they have assets, and what they have lacked for years is defensive help. So they will be out there looking for defensive help because they're losing Jake Gardiner as well, and so this is a tough situation. Would they move Kadri? They're gonna move Kadri for an asset, on the back end, and they had many chips to do such. They got Kasperi Kapanen, as well, who's a restricted free agent. They can't re-sign everybody. Mitchell Marner is going to command, obviously more than, upwards of $10 to $11 million per. So they're going to be against the cap, so they're going to look to offload. But
right.
my guy,
in the interest of time. You're saying Duchene would be your choice?
Yeah, my guy is Matt Duchene.
Okay. Anthony, why don't you weigh in on this heavy question? And thanks again to Flyers, our O&B Puckcast listener. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, Duchene, for me, that's a big no-no because I think the Flyers, they do need an impact second-line center, but they need more of a stopgap second-line center. They don't want to get locked into a big-ticket contract. They already have a few of those in Voracek and Giroux because Nolan Patrick will be, in my opinion, a top 6 center down the line one day. You have Morgan Frost in the pipeline who figures to be that. Sean Couturier is still a young player. So I don't think the Flyers should be in the market to get locked into a Matt Duchene type of contract. And in the interest of that, I think they could acquire a guy like Ryan Nugent-Hopkins would be right up their alley. He has 2 years left at $6 million AAV. Only 26 years old, so his age leaves the room for a possible extension. But even if it doesn't work out, they're not tied in. They're not going to box out a player like Morgan Frost. They're not going to be cap strapped to extend a guy like Nolan Patrick. I just think the Flyers have a lot of kids coming who have a high ceiling, but they just got to insulate them in the relatively short term with some good young players. So out of the players you mentioned, I think Ryan Nugent-Hopkins would be a perfect fit here. And not to mention, he has played the wing. So, yeah, I'm going with Nugent-Hopkins.
Okay. Dan, you will weigh in on this because this is a big question a lot of us are very interested in.
Oh, putting all the pressure on me, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole point of bringing in a second-line center is to carry the offensive burden that Nolan Patrick is not ready for. So for me, it's going to be Nugent-Hopkins or Duchene. I do think Nugent-Hopkins would be the way to go. I've liked him for a little while now. But if you are looking for points, I think Duchene is kind of that sneaky player. Again, you're going to have to pay for him. There's going to be a lot of teams that are going to want his services, and he may be, more expensive. I talked about this a little bit on my show, the PBW Radio last week, about Jake Voracek and the PK Subban trade rumors, and how bringing in somebody like Subban on a smaller contract helps them in the long term. On a shorter contract helps them in the long term because they can, they're not stuck with it like they would be if they signed Erik Karlsson. And I think the same thing goes here. I think Nugent-Hopkins, who's got, only a couple years left at $6 million versus Duchene, who's probably going to get paid for 5, 6, 7 years at $7+ million. So I think in the interest of short-term saving money, but also can help the team now, Nugent-Hopkins would be the way to go.
Okay, wow. Well, I got to weigh on this one because this is one thing I'd advise anybody judging the question is when you look at the fatigue factor with Couturier and Giroux, with killing penalties and playing hard minutes in general. Both Ryan Nugent-Hopkins and Kevin Hayes, are primary penalty killers and have been for a while. So that's something you might want to factor in. But, Chef, that's going to be tough to pick a winner with that. What's your verdict on that?
I'm going to go with Anthony.
Okay.
I really think, and here's the thing, and just because you have so many younger guys in there, I don't want to waste, and I don't want to say waste, but let's say tie up unnecessary money. if we have that Morgan Frost coming up and all these other good players that we hope to have, I'm thinking Radcliffe, and others as well, because personally he's one of my favorites. I want that money to be there for them when they get here. I don't want to have to sit there and go, we're going to lose a prospect or something, or trade it away just because we don't have the space for them. So I would much rather right now agree with Anthony and say a 2-year deal for somebody you're not going to have to worry about later on.
Yeah, so the leftover contract of Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, if I remember right, is that Anthony RNH?
2 years at $6 million.
Yeah. Okay. And again, sorry for the dentist drill sound. You hear that during podcasts a lot, and it reminds you that sometimes it can be unpleasant. But moving along, we go to the next question. And, okay, this is kind of reworking a question by Chris Martini, one of our listeners. I just wanted to throw something else in here, and we're going to start with Dan. Is Colin Miller a reasonable fallback option if the Flyers miss out on Trouba, Spurgeon, PK Subban, or is he just a guy?
I think he's just a guy. The thing with adding defense this summer is if you're going to add somebody, go big or don't. They have a pretty solid group right now, and I think adding somebody who, isn't going to bring a whole lot to the table, kind of stat-wise, I don't give a crap what his analytics are, but, adding somebody like him, I just think he's going to be just a guy. I think if you're going to bring in somebody, make it a Carlson or a Subban or a Trouba, make it count. Otherwise, I think they have plenty enough talent on the back end where they don't need somebody like him.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I know Brad Keffer from Broad Street Hockey thought, he wrote an article praising Miller, but also putting it in perspective, thinking, well, maybe if we could trade a guy like Haig to get a Miller, then it kind of makes sense. But Jamey, let me get your opinion on this. And again, thanks to Chris Martini, one of the O&B Puckcast supporters. Yeah.
I think he is a solid fallback option for the Philadelphia Flyers. There's going to be teams that are, buying at the bit for him as well. Look at the Leafs. I mean, they're going to look, they're losing Jake Gardiner. I'll get back with them, being against the Caps. So they're going to be a team that you're competing against in order to get a Colin Miller. Keep in mind that Colin Miller also has 2 years of a modified no trade clause in 2021. That it begins in 2021 and ends in 21-22 because that's the end of his term. But I think he is a reasonable fallback option for the Flyers. See, this from what Dan said, this is another thing. The Flyers I just don't want Chuck Fletcher to be pressured into making any move, and that would be a pressure move to going after a Colin Miller. I believe that the Flyers are going to shore up the top 4 defensemen at the draft. Who they get, I don't know. I'm looking for, Jacob Trouba, but, you never know. But, I think that Colin Miller, there's not much out there, as via free agency anyway. I would stay away from Erik Karlsson. His years have caught up to him. He's playing terrible, in the play, this series anyway.
Yeah.
He just looked out of shape. He's hurt. Make no mistake. So we don't know the severity of his injuries. Is he going to have major, is he going to require major, surgery in the off season? Is he going to be healthy for training camp? I don't want the Flyers going down any route that they were this past year in terms of like an unhealthy Brian Elliott and unhealthy Michael Nervers, and then they get this big prize in Erik Karlsson that'll make the fan base very happy and stuff because you see they're competing with the Phillies, the Sixers, and of course the Philadelphia Eagles and stuff. So, but you go out and get this big guy, Erik Karlsson put in his years and he was a fantastic player. It's just a shame to see him now. What a great player he was, and now it's just like, it was like a Doc Holliday per se.
Yeah.
It like years caught up to him like very quick. You didn't expect it, but I hope they stay away from that. I hope they stay away from Tyler Myers. I want Chuck Fletcher to just go in here, pick up the bits, the pieces that a few pieces, plug a few holes in, and see where he goes. Not make any pressure decisions.
Yeah. Okay. No, that I can understand where you're coming from. Anthony, you get the final word.
Well, coming back full circle to Colin Miller, I feel like we got a bit away from him there. But no, I'm kind of with Dan on this one. You know, he played third pairing for a Vegas team that isn't especially deep on defense. He logged 19 minutes a game. He's 26 years old, so I kind of think this is what he is. I don't think there's room for him to break out. I'm not saying he's a bad defenseman, but I'm with Dan saying that he's just another guy, and I think if he got brought in, he would just be the new whipping boy because the fans are so starved and hungry for an impact defenseman with a high pedigree. I wouldn't go that route. If you can't land a big name like Trouba or Carlson or what have you, just keep what you have. There's no point in changing 4 quarters for $1.
Yeah, no. Okay. Chef, 4 quarters for $1. Jamey had a very lengthy explanation, was well thought out. And, of course, Dan was pretty much right to the point. Your verdict. And we
see, this is tough for me because I'll tell you why. Because I really think that they're not going to keep their first round pick. I think they're going to use that to get a Trouba or a Spurgeon, whatever. But if I'm listening to the arguments, I have to go with Dan here. I want to go with Jamey, thinking that Jamey is right, that they're going to use that pick, the draft to get Trouba. But the reality is, I think I have to play my call here safe and say that I'm going with Dan.
Okay, that's fair enough. As we move on to the penultimate question in the first annual Great Flyers debate. Okay. Dan, we're going to go right with you on this question. We'd like to thank Bennett_CK, Bennett_CK, one of our listeners. Thanks so much. We've kind of reworked this question. In fact, I think this might be verbatim. Without regard for cap or compensation, which RFA/UFA would you want most for the Flyers? Money's not an object, Dan. Just take the wallet out, put the dollar bills on the table, and you're paying for...
Man, I guess if we're going UFA, it's Panarin. I think if you're going to go big, go do it. They need a big change this summer, and he's the guy. If we're allowed to include, restricted free agents, pay Marner whatever he wants. But yeah, I would go big or go home this summer. And, Panarin, whether he wants to be here or not, who knows? But, he's the gold standard right now in the free agent market. And he would be the guy that I would choose.
Okay. Anthony.
I originally was going to go with Marner, but then I thought about a big Flyers need, and I'm going with Braden Point. That guy was insane this year. He was incredible, and he plays center. I could just see him as eventually the top line center for the Flyers. A line of just hypotheticals, Giroux, Point, Voracek. That's just salivating to think about, and in the short term, he would be playing behind Couturier. So, yeah, in the interest of the position, I think Braden Point would be my guy.
Wow, that one came a little bit from, I think, right field, because there's some rightness about that. Jamey, what say you?
I'd say Patrick Lane. I absolutely love the guy. He can pot a big goal. The guy just, moves the needle for his team and stuff. He'll do whatever is necessary for winning. I love Lane. He's a natural goal scorer. So in terms of restricted free agents, I'm going to go Lane. In terms of unrestricted free agents, I'm going to go Matt Duchene.
Okay. And some people pronounce that Line A, depending on what part of the country.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's who we're talking about.
Okay, that's okay. I've been called Isaiah before. I've been called a lot of things, including a lot of not nice things. Chef, I'm being snarky tonight. Don't mind me. Boy, there's some really good answers there.
Wow. Yeah. Now this is going to be like an opinion thing, isn't it?
That's why I made you the judge, so you could be the jerk. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I could be the whipping boy of the night. Wow. I'm going to have to go with Braden Point because just the sheer, like you said, the thought of that line, wow, it does make you salivate a little bit.
Did you say the thought?
If you're making me choose those three, I have to do by process of elimination of what we talked about already. Duchene's going to cost too much, too long term. Kill the little kids you got coming up already. Dan's, Panarin, okay, kind of expected, but something that it won't pan out long term, I don't think so. Going with Braden Point.
Braden Point, okay. Yeah, that was outside the box, and I think the people would appreciate that. So, you know, we have come to the end of the Great Flyers debate with this final question here. Yes. Now, we're going to start with Jamey and try to be as succinct, concise as possible. Describe your ideal but realistic offseason. So let's just say maybe 3 acquisitions at most. Jamey, the floor is yours.
I'll just use 2, Jakob Trouba and Kevin Hayes.
Okay. Very good. Anthony.
I think acquiring Ryan Nugent-Hopkins would be the first thing for, like I mentioned before, the short-term benefit in terms of contract and immediate impact. And I think that because Edmonton is so cap-strapped, they're going to be able to pry him out of there. And as far as defense, I'll go with Jamey too. Jacob Trouba, I think he's a guy that you can afford to give a big-ticket contract to. And it would be well worth the investment. And just re-sign Talbot in as the backup. So Talbot, Trouba, RNH, it fits every need, it plugs every hole, and it doesn't cap strap you long term.
Okay. Dan, you get the final word.
Give me Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, give me PK Subban, and sign Samuel Moran for a lifetime contract.
Now,
I gotta give you props, brother. I love Moran.
Yeah,
I love Sam Moran.
Funny, man. I'm
going to be honest. The guy is one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet.
Who's that?
Like Samuel Moran.
Oh, yeah. No doubt. I don't doubt that at all.
Class act in the locker room. You go up to him, you talk to him, he's taking off his gear. He don't care. The dude is a class act.
Look, I have hopes for Sam Moran here, kind of replacing Robert Haig, who gets thrown in on a deal, and then we don't have to call him the next Andrew McDonald. Sam Moran will probably make a lot of fans because he'll be physical when the Flyers maybe could use that. But let's not delay any further judgment on this. Chef, what is your verdict for this question? And finally, who has won the debate?
Wow. Realistically speaking, if you're going by what's realistic, I will say that probably Dan's is most realistic, in my opinion. And again, I'm the whipping boy here, so I'm going to go with Dan on this one.
What the hell is that?
The glass broke. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, was that was that me breaking the internet with my decision?
Yes, of course.
Stone Cold Steve Austin.
That's what I thought too.
I thought Jamey dropped his beer.
I do. Hey, there was like
okay. We're having fun here. So Chef, who has won the 2019 Great Flyers debate among our 3 contestants?
It will be Dan, the Flyer fan, with 6, and then Anthony with 5, and Jamey with 4. So 6 to 5 to 4.
Okay.
That's why my judgment went down there. Questions, but if I agree with any part of your argument, I gave you a point for credit. So,
yeah. So this is kind of like ring generalship in boxing.
Yes.
So Dan, congratulations. Do you have anything to say to your adoring fans?
Samuel Moran is the number 1 defenseman on the Philadelphia Flyers. There you go.
Wow. That's I don't know what to say about that.
Flyers jersey to celebrate his win.
I don't know what to say about that.
Well, gentlemen, this has been fun. It had a chance to be a disaster. We had the dentist drill. We had breaking glass. We had all kinds of things going on, annoying the heck out of, hopefully, not our listeners, but maybe ourselves. So before we go, of course, some final thoughts and maybe some IDs and information, contact information. Dan, let's start with you.
At Dan the Flyer fan, at Brotherly Puck, at Brotherly_pod, at National Puck, and at National Pod Net. We are adding new podcasts to the network every week. So if you have a show and you want to be featured, shoot me a DM, shoot DM to the site. You want to write for the National Puck? We are looking for writers for all 31 teams right now. So hit me up there as well.
All right. So, Anthony, let's get your information if you have any final thoughts or things that you would like to put across to our listeners.
Well, you can find me at DiMarco25. You could check out all our work at thefourthperiod.com or on the Twitter side at TFP. And I just want to go out by saying that I think people should buckle up, and this offseason is going to really much resemble that of 2007. That's all I'm going to say.
We all hope that. That's for sure. Jamey, you were our very first guest here on the O&B Puckcast. And I'll tell you, I've always liked your work, but I'll tell you, where you're at right now, even in a year, is really astounding. Let's hear from you. Where can people find your work and contact Jamey Baskow?
You can find me at phillysportsnetwork.com or at Jamey Baskow on Twitter. We have a lot of stuff cooking. I got a nice interview article coming out with Lassie Thompson, who I think is a high-end selection for the Philadelphia Flyers in the second round. I love his shot. He's a right-handed defenseman, really good guy. Had a hell of an interview with him. So that should be coming out sometime this week. I just had a nice interview coming out with Tanner Lazinski, who really opened up to me about 3.5 weeks ago. It was just a nice piece. Of course, Tanner will be fighting, and for the Ohio State Buckeyes, as we know, he's going back to school, but to settle some unfinished business. And let's see if he signs by next August 15th of 2020.
Yeah, that's really great. You can check out Jamey and all the fine writers with all the various, not only the 4 major sports, but they cover the soccer, boxing, all kinds of stuff. PhillySportsNetwork.com. Really appreciate you coming on board as usual. I'd like to thank everybody. And Chef, before we go and I give the final salute, what can you tell everybody?
Keep on cooking.
Keep on
Flyers
cooking.
are going to be cooking. They got a recipe for success. And you're going to see it this summer. I'm just going to reiterate what Anthony said. This is going to be a big off season.
Yeah. And the thing is, everybody, just like to thank all of our listeners. We're going to go on a little bit of a hiatus. We're going to come back with a draft preview show with a very special guest. We're going to get you ready for everything. And I agree with the consensus here. I think we're going to have a lot of fun right before the draft. I think we're going to be back on the 17th, right before that weekend, the 17th or 18th, because the rumors will be rampant. It's going to be crazy. And but in between now and then, if you would continue to follow us at O&B Puck, our Twitter account at O&B Puck, the O&B Puckcast, and if you could rate and subscribe to the O&B Puckcast on our various formats, we have our own YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and look up the O&B Puckcast, of course, iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, all that good stuff. So we're going to wrap it up there, and until next time, everybody, take care.